Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending on where you are on the globe. I am Aldit Hunkar, and I'm very thrilled to lead you through this segment of the program. Before we dive into the contents, let's watch an introductory video first.
Climate change is having increasing impacts on people. Infrastructure is hit hard, and that has real costs on human, nature, and economy. Cyclones are destroying power and communication lines, causing energy outages.
Cyclone Foni tore through 14 districts of Odisha on 3rd May 2019, leaving behind a massive trail of destruction and plunging several towns and villages in complete darkness. With most communication lines devastated, information from several districts, especially worst hit Puri, Bhubaneswar, Cuttack, Khurda, Kendrapada, and Jagatsinghpur, was in complete disarray.
Hurricanes are destroying homes and businesses.
It's coming very close to these islands. It's across Barbuda, it's heading towards Anguilla, St. Martin, then Puerto Rico.
It was angry. That's what it sounded like to me. When the roof came off, there were just these horrible screeching, this horrible noise. It was devastating, and then we all had to run.
Yeah, we were here during the storm, and it was really, really hard when we get up the next morning and see our homes, our friend homes, everything is just totally destroyed.
Floods have devastating impacts on entire landscapes.
Komatsuka dango besa kuti mudzi wose uli mbembe madzi basi bambo ena ndena amalayi tetenga amene maritenga amene tinalipo ndikumapititsa ku fisidi uko anapangako ulimi wothirira ndi anakumba.
Rising sea levels are claiming land and impacting coastlines.
With the rain, the soil has become very soft, so I'm sure given 20 to 30 years to come, I don't think this house will be the same place.
The distance between the house and the water, when we came here, it was around 10 meters, and now it's around 8 meters.
We can't continue on this path. We need to act now.
The Dominicans, they're resilient and strong people. We'll build bigger and better. Yeah, we will rebuild. We haven't got no choice but to move forward.
So, welcome to the infrastructure anchoring event, which will be hosted by Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen of the Netherlands and Shamara Wickramanayake, who is the CEO of Macquarie. They are the champions of the Infrastructure Action Track and of the Global Commission on Adaptation. I will be joined live in the studio here in The Hague by the Minister and by Willem Stitselaar, who is the Senior Managing Director at Macquarie Capital. Climate impact goes hand in hand with infrastructure and real human and economic cost. We need to change the way we plan, finance, design, build, and maintain new and existing infrastructure, which is why we are delighted to be joined today by leaders from the private sector, governments, international organizations, and NGOs in the 3 panel discussions that will follow. The speakers of the panel discussions will also be present in the chat box, so please do not hesitate to ask your questions there and your comments as well, of course. It's a very full program, so let's get started. Opening this anchoring event with a speech is Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, the Minister of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands and Commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aldith. Your Excellencies, colleagues, fellow travelers on our journey to a climate-resilient future. Good morning. Welcome to this anchoring event for the Infrastructure Action Track. And to Shamara, I say good afternoon. Thank you for co-hosting this event from Down Under as part of the world's first global summit on climate adaptation. You're celebrating Australia Day today, so it's great to have you here at this webinar on your national holiday. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a reality. Its impacts are becoming more severe with every passing year. And we feel these effects every day. Higher temperatures, fiercer storms, more unpredictable rainfall, rising sea levels, drought, and more bushfires. So we all recognize the need to act. And for that, we require knowledge and expertise. Because climate change is changing our world, every corner of it. And it challenges us with issues that we haven't seen before. The good news is that adaptation will enhance growth and development, create business opportunities, reduce inequalities, and protect nature. But effective adaptation is conditional on cooperation and partnership, on taking account of climate resilience when investing in infrastructure. A good example of this is Europe's largest aqueduct, which was built a couple of years ago here in the Netherlands. It includes extra water storage capacity to act as a buffer during extreme rainfall. We've set the standard for combining divergent interests, both public and private, and using the power of both nature and technology. That's why we're contributing to a training course on public-private partnership and climate-resilient infrastructure. Our aim this year is to train 30 climate-resilient infrastructure officers. These cryos from all around the world will act as experts and ambassadors in their own organizations, national and international networks. I'm delighted to announce that applications are now officially open for cryo candidates. You'll find more information on the Global Commission on Adaptation website. We're currently collaborating with Bangladesh on the implementation of system-wide approaches to infrastructure resilience. And we're also joining the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure hosted by the Government of India. We're joining hands. Because cooperation has always been a key element of human success. It's time not only to acknowledge that, but also to act on it. Cooperation and an eye for the bigger picture. One cannot make a single road or engineering construction climate resilient without taking into account the surrounding area. No short-term solutions with newly built roads being sagged through extreme rainfall and drought because of the surrounding area is not climate-proof, or by predictable declining coastline. Over the next 2 hours, we will discuss climate-resilient infrastructure. What needs to be done? And how can we help each other? We're keen to share Dutch expertise on water management and infrastructure with you. And we'd love to hear how you cope with hot and dry summers. I wish you a constructive and inspiring session. Thank you.
And thank you, Your Excellency, for highlighting the Dutch experience and also for explaining the importance of global cooperation to accelerate resilient infrastructure. I will be speaking with you again at the end of this event. Thank you very much, Minister van Nieuwenhuizen. We now go to Sydney, Australia, where the co-lead of the action track, Shamara Wickramanayake, discussed the importance of resilient infrastructure with Makhtar Diop.
Hi, my name's Shamara Wickramanayake, a Commissioner for the Global Commission on Adaptation and the Chief Executive of Macquarie Group. I'm delighted to be supporting the Climate Adaptation Summit by co-hosting the Infrastructure Anchoring event. As a GCA Commissioner and the CEO of the largest infrastructure investor globally, I'm passionate about the role that the private sector can play in making our existing infrastructure more resilient and ensuring that the new infrastructure we build has climate resilience designed in right from the start. Macquarie invests in infrastructure projects across 6 continents, so we've seen firsthand the impact that our changing climate can have on these vital services and businesses, and the importance of anticipating climate risks. We know that the climate challenge demands strong partnership between private and public sector, and value the important role of multilateral organisations in enabling this, none more so than the World Bank. So I'm delighted to welcome Makhtar Diop, Vice President for Infrastructure at the World Bank, to discuss how the private sector and multilateral institutions can work together to finance resilient infrastructure. Welcome, Makhtar, and thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Shamara, thank you so very much to give me the opportunity to talk to you about what we are doing at the World Bank in terms of resilience in infrastructure.
So, Makhtar, while the past year has been dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we were on many occasions once again reminded about the urgency of the need to improve our climate resilience. And sitting here in Australia, we certainly need no reminders of the importance of the issue. But from your seat at the World Bank, can you share your perspectives on the importance of improving climate resilience, the role of infrastructure, and also what the World Bank is doing on this?
It's clear that climate change is having a huge impact on infrastructure. Let's put it in context. We have countries which have often very little resources, pressure on their debt, their fiscal situation is difficult. So they have to spend a lot of money on maintaining their existing infrastructure. And often because of that pressure, they are not able to do it on a regular basis. Therefore, building resilient infrastructure not only is good for climate in general and to be able to improve people's life, but it makes a lot of sense because countries which are not able to sustain and maintain their infrastructure on a regular basis by making the right and appropriate choice in terms of investment in infrastructure and adapting to the external shocks that they be facing, are able to save money and do not have to rebuild those infrastructures that have been destroyed over time.
Are there other examples of the types of activities that you're focusing on?
We talk a lot about resilient infrastructure in the urban setting. We're thinking about roads in cities, we're thinking about other type of infrastructure in cities, but also there is a big component of it which is linked to infrastructure and works that we do in the rural space. We are just yesterday, we had the One Planet Summit where the World Bank pledged close to $5 billion to support a big initiative which is called the Green Wall in Africa, which means that adapting the economies to drought and being able to make a country much more resilient to drought, but around that investment on biodiversity that will be made to ensure that we have accompanying infrastructure so that populations that will be living in that new ecosystem will be able also to improve their living conditions and to increase their income as population will be in the rural space. So we are, this is an important type of interventions that we're having right now outside the urban space. There is another type of interventions that we're having. As you know, a lot of countries are facing coastal erosion. And this coastal erosion is affecting a lot the livelihood of fishermen, of poor people, which end up migrating to Europe or things like that. So we are investing a lot on coastal erosion and coastal protection to be able to build a resilient infrastructure so that when we build a road on a seashore, it's not destroyed before the end of its life cycle.
The private sector and private finance are, of course, a huge provider of climate adaptation, action and investment. At Macquarie, we see investment in improving resiliency as an important part of the management of our portfolio companies to help manage risk and enhance performance and ensure they continue to provide valued services to the community. So what's your opinion of the role of the private sector in advancing climate resilience, and what more can we do to deepen partnerships among countries, international organisations like yourselves and the private sector?
When I talk to great investors like you, Shamara, and what I hear is de-risking, de-risking, de-risking. We are often asked to invest and want to invest in environments which are not very safe sometimes for political reasons, or just because there is a lot of economic uncertainty. So, and your shareholders, your investors would like to secure their investment and have a return, a higher return, but also secure return to their investment. So what we are trying to do is to de-risk as much as possible. We have a guarantee instrument. We have other instruments that we are putting in place at the World Bank to be able to make those investments for you more attractive, but also to crowd in the private sector in general. By doing that, and by helping the private sector to better perceive and to better price the risks that they are facing in those countries, we are creating the condition to have a larger flows of investment in sectors which are dearly in need of investment. We are facing a situation where you have a lot of liquidity. You have pension fund, institutional investors, which have resources, important resources, but which are looking at returns which are much higher because they are facing an aging population, which will be drawing on these resources. And we have at the same time huge needs of investment in infrastructure. So matching these two in a context where everybody and collectively there is a social contract around greening the planet and working for the future generation and ensuring that climate change will not affect their future is a new paradigm that really give us opportunity to work with all the instruments we have to bring the private sector, which is coming with new ideas, to bring social bonds, to bring guarantees and other type of instruments that we have been developing recently.
Well, it's fantastic to hear you say that, because that's exactly our view as well, is that there's a huge amount of money in the private sector, but it needs to be catalysed. And the way public sector and multinational institutions can help is by, as you say, de-risking through policy frameworks, first loss capital, demand use cases, etc. So we're just very pleased that you are focusing on all that.
Thank you so much, Shamara. And this is something that we will continue doing. And we will try to also bring other dimensions, is technology. Real technology will help us a lot on building a resilient infrastructure. With the IoT, with the sensor becoming cheaper and cheaper, we have using technology which now being able to better anticipate the need for maintenance, to better measure the impact of climate change on infrastructure, and over time to be able to help a scientist and a researcher to build even solutions which are creating more and more resilient infrastructure. So we have a movement now which is quite interesting, which is bringing together technology, a new social contract worldwide around greening the world, creating growth in a poorer country, but also being able to do it in a way where we serve the poorest in the world.
Well, thank you very much. I think that covers all the questions we were planning to discuss, but is there anything else you want to share with us?
What I would like to add is that this type of conversation are very important. They're very important because it helps really perceive the risk and to better understand what you are considering, you investors, as a source of uncertainty, and how we can better shape and fine-tune our de-risking instrument. So this dialogue for me is essential. Repeating it, having it by sectors, by region, by sub-regions is essential because it allows us to fine-tune really what we want to do, to adapt the product to your needs and to be able to reach the goals that the common goals that we have as government and private sector.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Makta, for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to continuing our relationship and the World Bank's support of the work of the GCA. And I'm also looking forward to seeing your ambitious plans on infrastructure and climate resilience coming to fruition in the months and years ahead.
Thank you so much, Shamara. It's a huge pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Welcome back in the studio in The Hague. And thank you, Shamara and Magdar, for explaining the role of infrastructure in improving climate resilience, and also for explaining the way that Macquarie Group and the World Bank are already working in that respect. Now, to get an even better understanding of resilient infrastructure in practice, we need practical examples of technical and financial cooperation to develop resilient infrastructure projects across different geographies and income levels. Up next is a video that gives those examples.
Globally, good practices of climate-resilient infrastructure are being implemented. From south to north, investment in resilient infrastructure is increasing people's resilience in the face of climate change. There are 3 priority areas for scaling up action: incorporating climate risks, adaptation and resilience through the use of standards, adopting a systems approach to infrastructure, and mobilization of investment in climate-resilient infrastructure. So let us have a look at examples of global good practices. Investment in off-grid solar energy lights Rwandan homes.
It is too expensive for governments to expand the grids to far places. It makes much more sense to use off-grid systems which are portable in nature and they can be scaled according to anyone's demand and energy requirements.
ariko tubonye uno murasire nibwo twavuye mu kizima, nabona ko twavuye mu kizima tukabona urumuri. Nuko za mpungenge zose natangiye mbabwira zashize.
Mobilizing investment in climate-resilient transport.
Countries are learning to prepare for extreme weather and manage its impact. After the cyclones, the World Bank provided emergency support to Mozambique, not just to rebuild critical roads and bridges, but to make them more resilient. That involved building back better, improving the design of transport infrastructure, and improving the way it is maintained. Thanks in part to those efforts, economic activity is back on track. People can access jobs, services, and markets, and Mozambique is now better equipped to face all the uncertainties of climate change. Transport is central to solving the climate change crisis and its toll on the poor. By changing the way we move, we can lower global emissions, minimize the impact of disasters, and we can create a better future for people and the planet.
Adapting infrastructure to hurricanes and flood.
I'm very much glad for it because it protects my home, the homes along the riverbanks, and also our lives. You know, people might say, oh, why you are living on the riverbank? But then it is basically this where we have to live. It's like not like if we have a choice, you know?
What I like about my work is I see that I'm doing something important to my community. So I put my strength, my mind into helping to do this for my community. Because it's not only for me or the next man, it's for the whole country along with my community and for the future of my community.
Well, I trust that these examples have inspired you and even given you a clear understanding of all the possibilities. I would now like to hand back to Shamara Vikramanayake, coming live from Sydney, where she will discuss how best practices can become standard practices to increase the resilience of existing infrastructure. Shamara, it's all yours.
Thank you, Aldith, and I'm delighted to be joined now in this live session by three great panelists to discuss the topic, as you said, of adapting the infrastructure we have. So over the next 25 minutes, we'll explore what the public and the private sector is already doing to strengthen the climate resilience of our existing infrastructure. And the expert panelists we're privileged to be joined by Preeti Bhandari, first of all, Chief of the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Theme and concurrently Director of Sustainable Development and Climate Change for the Asian Development Bank. Then Lawrence Slade, CEO of the Global Infrastructure Investors Association, and Dick Venshop, CEO of Royal Schiphol Group. So thank you all for joining. If I could start with you, Preeti. We just heard a little earlier from Makhtar Diop of the World Bank on the involvement they are having. And it would be great to hear from you about the role the Asian Development Bank is playing in this important area. So as the regional development bank for Asia with 49 Asia-Pacific countries as members, could you tell us a little about the climate risks and impacts that are at stake in these countries?
Thank you, Shamara, and thank you for the invitation to this summit and this particular session organized by Macquarie Group. I'm very happy to join this session and talk about the developments at the Asian Development Bank. In terms of what you talked about, how do we see the Asia-Pacific region? We do feel that Asia-Pacific region is at the front line of climate risks. The battle against climate change would be won or lost in this region. And we are already witnessing the extreme weather events, the increased frequency and intensity of events, be it tropical cyclones. You are very close to the Pacific Island countries, and you're quite familiar with the havoc that they create, or be it increased precipitation events. And if you overlay this with the exposure and vulnerability of both physical assets and people, then all the development gains of the region are likely to be undone with the high climate risk. And from that perspective, ADB is very keenly, assisting our developing member countries or our client countries to ensure to climate-proof the infrastructure assets. But what is worrisome is that the impacts that we are seeing now are at the upper end of the range of projections that we see, be it sea level rise. It is expected to be higher than was projected earlier. And that is an existential issue for the Pacific Island countries in the Asia-Pacific region. In South Asia, if you see Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, the intense heat waves, of course, they are impacting the people, the agriculture sector. But if you look at possible impacts on on infrastructure sectors, the cost of building infrastructure, the cost of integrating new options that are climate proofed, and also the decreased labor productivity, how it could change the whole economics of building infrastructure are issues that we need to bear in mind. And finally, the compounding risk. It is not one hazard that we have to look into. It's a complex of multiple hazards. And also, I heard in the video before, and also comments by the minister on how to take a system-wide approach to building resilient infrastructure. And we are happy to say that on the occasion of this summit, we have released a report jointly undertaken with the Global Center on Adaptation on a system-wide approach to building resilient infrastructure, which takes into account the cascading impacts due to the interconnectedness of sectors, and also has implications, macroeconomic implications, be it credit ratings of countries that could be impacted, or insurance premiums that you pay for protecting your infrastructure. So what I can say in a nutshell is that there's no way we can now not address building resilient infrastructure and undertaking climate risk-informed planning for our infrastructure. So I'll stop over here. And ADB is, like the World Bank, like it was mentioned earlier, is looking at various entry points to build resilient infrastructure. Thank you.
Right. And with such material impacts then for this region, are you able to tell us about some of the specific projects that ADB is financing to improve resiliency in some of the countries in this region?
Sure. I think we were the first multilateral development bank, if I may blow my own horn for my organization, in 2014 to mandate climate risk screening for our projects. And since 2014, we have undertaken this two-step approach, where at the very conceptual stage, we look at the risk to our projects. And if the projects which are at medium and high level risk then have to go through a full-blown climate risk assessment and integration of adaptation options. So I'll give you three examples. One is, from the criticality of an infrastructure to the development of the country. The second is related to technology standards, again, something that was mentioned in the video that we just saw. And the third is related to new technologies that could be that we are introducing. So starting with the first one on the criticality of infrastructure, this is regarding a port upgradation that we undertook in Tonga. This is the Nuku'alofa project, upgrading project for that port, which is, a critical lifeline for the development of the island of Tonga. So we looked at, in this 40 million project, there was about 15 million, which integrated, adaptation options like building seawalls by raising the height of the containers platform, and also looking at, how the drainage around the port could also be upgraded, so that when in the event of a storm surge or flooding, how the drainage could help manage the impact. So that's one example of an ADB investment in a critical infrastructure. In terms of standards in Vietnam, we are working with the government of Vietnam, which has mandated a 1 in 25-year flooding event for its road infrastructure. But if you look at the past, that 1 in 25-year event, the level of the rainfall is going to be very different under a climate scenario. So any future road construction should be taking into account that higher precipitation levels in this 1 in 25-year scenario. So to what extent can the road design incorporate these new standards is again another way we are enabling the countries in the region. And the third one, in terms of new technology, I'll talk about Bangladesh, where we have assisted them in Dhaka and the Western Zone to enhance the transmission systems for better energy supply and more efficient energy supply. So over here, in terms of how we have integrated climate impact, what we have seen is to what extent can we see both underground and overhead transmission lines, how they can take into account various impacts, be it related to the heat or be it related to flooding, and then gas insulated substations that take into account also the natural hazards that could impact the region. So the role of new technology also becomes important, and to that extent ADB is trying to be as prepared as it can to ensure that these new technologies are introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeti. That sounds like a very active role that the Asian Development Bank is playing. If I could turn to you, Lawrence, then it'd be interesting to hear what the private sector is doing alongside organisations like the development banks. So as the Global Infrastructures Association's head, your members represent about 780 billion of infrastructure assets under management. How aware are infrastructure investors about the challenges of adaptation and about seeing the benefits of adaptation investment?
Well, I think, thank you very much, Shamara, and for the invite today. I mean, I think from the investors' point of view, they're definitely much more cognizant today around the risks that climate change present to the sector, but most importantly around the work that needs to be done to ensure that climate resilience and climate adaptation are no longer extraneous to business, that actually it's the opposite, that ensuring your asset base is resilient to future climate challenges is actually now an essential element of managing a range of assets wherever they might be around the world. And I think a critical part of this is that many of our members, the assets that they hold, that they operate, are of course providing essential services to communities around the world. Now that just increases the importance of making sure that your assets are resilient to a whole range of different climate issues that we're likely to face today and of course going way into the future. And I think it's from a financial point of view and from a business point of view, actually, there's a really strong case for making sure that you are investing today in that resilient infrastructure. A report, for example, by McKinsey with the National Institute of Building Scientists showed that for every $1 that you invest in infrastructure, you get back over future years $6. So a very clear case, should one be needed, that doing the right thing and investing in resilient infrastructure actually has a great return that can be reinvested in helping bring forward the clean infrastructure that we need for the future. And I think just to finish on this bit, we worked with Marsh McLennan and companies recently, and we identified 3 key areas that asset managers around the world need to look at. And I think one is climate-focused scenario planning. So using modern technologies that we've heard spoken about this morning to really help you understand the effects of the changing climate on your assets, whether you're land-based, offshore, coastal, inland, arid regions, doesn't matter, but use technology to help you understand the issues at play, modeling technology, for example. And then life cycle modeling. We're not talking about assets that have a 1 or 2 or 3 year life cycle. Often they have 50 years, 40 years or more in terms of their life cycle. So understand how the assets will develop over that period, understand how climate is likely to change over that period, and actually structure your investment program to take that into account over future years. And then I think understanding the interdependent risks across the infrastructure ecosystem. So in many cases, whether it's transport or whether it's energy or telecoms, there are other assets that are connected to your asset that are integral to the service provision. So in data, it could be network cabling and how that's connected to data centers and the end users. We all have to collaborate and work together to make sure that we can deliver resilient infrastructure. And that collaboration word is really important. And I think we've got to make sure that governments, that investors, and the actual asset operators are all working together to make sure we can deliver the resilient, clean infrastructure that society demands.
Yes, certainly collaboration is a key part of this. If I could turn then lastly to you, Dick, because you can talk us through a specific asset in terms of Schiphol. Obviously a critical asset with typically 71.1 million people passing through there, and a critical asset not just for the Netherlands but for Europe. But that asset, we invest in many airports, but your airport has a distinction of being located 4.5 meters below sea level. So can you tell us a little bit about how you think about climate resilience and adapting to climate change with Schiphol, Royal Schiphol Group and the airport there?
Yes, Shamara, thank you very much for hosting us. Very important topic. Just to be sure, of course, we are working on climate mitigation as well. We have a commitment to contribute to net zero aviation in 2050, in line with the Paris goals. But being responsible for a big piece of infrastructure which is below sea level, we have to look at climate adaptation as well. We see, of course, changing weather patterns, more extreme weather events as well. And we have started to really, as Lawrence indicated, to integrate that into our master planning, into our life cycle management, looking ahead in terms of decades. There's two issues we really try to deal with. One is, even at the level of the Netherlands, it's about rising temperatures and how that impacts operations. And the other one is, of course, water management, which is an extremely important one. And to give an example on both, on the rising temperatures, we are looking at perhaps changing the asphalt we use in the runways in terms of creating lighter asphalt with more with less heat absorption. Of course, the issue is not as big as in the Middle East or in the United States, but it is even playing in the Netherlands. And the big one, of course, is water management. Being below sea level in a public-private partnership with the public water management authorities, in the case of more extreme weather, more rainfall in a very short period. We are not allowed to bring all that water into the polder where it has to go, because it has to be dealt with there as well. So we have built now, and that's really a test bed, a buffer and drainage system when we built a new platform at the airport. And we're trying out various technologies there as well in terms of efficient water drainage and water storage below ground. We have more classical gutters, we have PVC crates, we have concrete rubble, sensoring in place. And with all of that, we try, of course, to manage the way we discharge water in a responsible way in collaboration with the public authorities. And that's the type of practices and knowledge we are going to build now. And that's something, of course, we are at Schiphol, we are in the Netherlands, we are an international operator. We participate in airports in Europe, in the United States, in Australia. And that's something we would like to make available worldwide as well. Of course, this type of pilots, of knowledges, of development. And that's a few examples. You will see green roofs at Schiphol as well, if you're in the departure hall, stuff like that. So water management, a key issue.
Those all sound like great examples. I guess the last thing I was interested for you to cover, an important point, is how you look at financing these projects in terms of looking at the returns as well as the risks that you manage. Because one of the things we're very keen for infrastructure investors to understand is that this makes good economic sense, adapting in making assets more resilient. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think on the economic side, looking forward and taking the risks into account, and therefore your obligation as a responsible operator to address those risks, I think that itself translates into a business case. At the moment, this type of project, like building a platform, is of course just financed by ourselves. But I'm aware that if you do it in the way that you have an economic case going forward, and with all the awareness now building around the financing side as well, I think we will be able to integrate that. Of course, there's cost involved. There will be side benefits, but the economic case will be clear, because you can't just go on without addressing those risks and then have a severe degradation of your assets over time. That is not responsible.
Yeah, and is the airport and aviation industry internationally working collaboratively in this area? You'd think it would make sense for them to.
Yes, absolutely. And you can't say it's universal at the moment, but you see it building up. Airports Council International has work streams on climate adaptation as well, next to all the work we do together on mitigation. And I think it will be a growing area of sharing best practices as well, not just within international companies like our own, but within the sector as well. And I would say it's a bit like safety as well. This is something which is pre-competitive. Yes, we want to be responsible. Yes, we want to be a front runner, but we are very open to share those experiences across the world because we know of other countries like Bangladesh, as mentioned by Preeti, and others that are having similar issues, and we better get each other up to speed with that.
Well, thank you to all three of you. Sadly, we're running out of time. We could talk about this topic for an hour, but it's great to hear, Preeti, everything the Asian Development Bank is doing in this important area, what infrastructure investors more broadly are doing, Lawrence, and then Dick, particularly in terms of the Royal Schiphol Group, but also airports around the world collaborating. So thank you all for joining us. It's a real honour for all of us to be working with the Dutch government and also our broader colleagues in the Global Centre for Adaptation now for the last 2 years, as well as in this session, to bring attention to this very important topic. And I'd like to hand back now to Aldith to moderate the next session. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shamara, for your excellent moderation of our first panel discussion, showing how the private and public sectors are stepping up really to ensure resilience in this changing climate. And in the following video, you will see examples that showcase the role of the private sector in climate adaptation.
In 2019, the Global Commission on Adaptation issued a call for leadership on climate resilience, highlighting the human, environmental, and economic need to adapt to a fast-changing climate. Climate-proofing existing infrastructure and building climate-resilient new infrastructure was identified as a priority, and the private sector was challenged to step up and drive investment. We're seeing private investors rise to that challenge globally. In 2017, a typhoon hit the Philippines, temporarily halving the electricity generation capacity at EDC's Malitbog geothermal power plant. In response, EDC improved its resilience against natural disasters, installing geohazard early warning systems to pick up seismic activity, creating rapid business continuity plans, rerouting pipes, and re-engineering cooling towers to withstand typhoons of up to 300 km/h winds. In India, solar plant operators face the challenge of keeping panels clean, often in areas facing water shortages. Bhadla Solar Plant installed 193 waterless, solar-powered autonomous cleaning robots to clean panels each evening, removing 99% of soiling to maintain peak performance in an eco-friendly way. In Finland, severe weather patterns have caused significant damage to electricity distribution networks. In 2011, damage from devastating winds saw the introduction of regulation to move the electricity network underground by 2028. In 2018, Elenia started the process of burying 26,000 kilometers of cables, incorporating smart technology for real-time monitoring, control, and fault location. In the Netherlands, the new 950-meter immersed Blankenberg tunnel will run below the Schur River, crossing the area's main flood protection dam. The project team worked with local authorities to reinforce existing flood prevention infrastructure, ensuring the project's ability to resist future water level rises. In Australia and Brazil, precision farming techniques and real-time data is being used across 4.8 million hectares of land. Farmers are using these techniques to improve soil health and combat land degradation by tailoring agricultural practices to match the specific needs of crops. Brazil generates approximately 75% of its electricity from hydroelectric power fed by the Amazon basin. More frequent and intense droughts have led to critical electricity shortages and rolling blackouts, the 1.5 gigawatt LNG-fired fast-start power plant in Sergipe supports Brazil's grid by reliably and rapidly supplying electricity, while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50% compared to coal and oil-fired generation. In 2020, Louisiana was hit by its worst hurricane season in over 100 years. Despite this disruption, the Calcasieu Pass LNG facility sustained very minor damage and no delays to its construction schedule due to a modular construction approach and storm surge protections designed to withstand even 1 in 500-year storms. The site had been purposely set back from the shoreline, also protecting it from erosion caused by rising sea levels. In the UK, Yorkshire Water invested to improve flood resilience measures at its water pump station, installing a steel sheet pile wall, demountable flood barriers, and a new surface water drainage system and storm isolation valve. These enhancements protected the drinking water supplies of 500,000 customers during severe floods in 2015. American Roads has integrated measures to be prepared for impacts of severe low temperatures, flooding and extreme weather events on toll roads, bridges and tunnels in Michigan and Alabama. The Detroit-Windsor Tunnel has installed dewatering pump systems to manage groundwater and reduce flooding risk and ice thaw, as the Detroit River has risen 50 inches since 1985. These are some of the many ways in which the private sector is driving investment in climate adaptation and resilience. The challenge now is to accelerate this action across the private and public sectors to deliver adaptation progress at a scale and pace which matches the climate challenge and seizes the opportunity.
So thank you for watching the video. And it turns out that we are globally on the same page when we say that the infrastructure we have needs to be made more resilient. But what about the trillions of dollars that go into new infrastructure every year? Now, the next panel will explore how we can build resilience from the outset while mobilizing investment for new infrastructure. This discussion was recorded earlier to accommodate most of the panelists who are in the USA, where it is in the middle of the night. Please join us in watching this discussion led by Mekhala Krishnan. Mekhala.
Welcome everyone to the Infrastructure We Need session. My name is Mekhala Krishnan. I'm a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey & Company's business and economics research arm. We at the McKinsey Global Institute have been doing research on physical climate risk for the past few years now, and I wanted to kick this session off with a few remarks about the nature of physical climate risks and why we're having this conversation today. Our work finds that physical climate risk is already in the system today, meaning we're experiencing events of greater intensity, greater frequency as a result of climate change. It is risk that is rising risk, meaning without adaptation and mitigation, the impacts that we're experiencing will only increase. And it is risk that is non-linear, meaning we could experience much larger impacts than the changes we see in the climate as the design thresholds of systems around us, whether it's buildings or a variety of infrastructure assets, are breached. And then finally, it is a regressive form of climate risk, meaning that the most vulnerable populations of the world are likely to be the most affected. And what all of this does is create an imperative for increasing the quality and quantity of infrastructure. By the quantity of infrastructure, we mean that we need to think more about addressing gaps there are to infrastructure funding, and managing some of the risks that I described, adapting to these risks. And then we also need to increase the quality of infrastructure. And by that, I mean thinking about integrating climate risk into all future infrastructure decisions, planning infrastructure not just for the climate of today, but for the climate of the future. And so with that framing in mind, I'm very excited to have a panel of folks on the call that represent a range of sectors, because we need action here on the part of multiple actors. And so just to quickly introduce the panel, we have with us Ambroise Fayol, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, Ambroise, who is the VP of the European Investment Bank. We have with us Martina Chung, who is the president of S&P Global Market Intelligence, and we have Jennifer Morris, who is the CEO of the Nature Conservancy. So thank you all for joining me on the panel today. So I want to kick us off with a question to you, Ambroise. And the EIB has committed to supporting $1 trillion of investment in climate action and for environmental sustainability over this decade. So I'd love to start this session by kicking off by asking you, what do you see as opportunities for scaling up investment in resilient infrastructure as part of this commitment? Where are you focused? Where do you see the greatest opportunities?
Let me say three things on this issue. First one, an issue about urgency. I mean, it is clear to the European Investment Bank that the decade that comes till 2030 is a critical decade for climate action and environment degradation. The EIB has made a very big commitment last year to have indeed 1 trillion investment catalyzed to support actions toward climate and environment. And we have, in addition to that commitment, to have all our operations, be they climate or not climate, be them all Paris aligned. We are the first multilateral development bank to do that. As we have indicated in our Climate Bank roadmap, we will promote climate resilience in everything we do, so that people, ecosystem, businesses, assets we support are prepared for the impact of climate change happening right now, as well as those still to come. And ultimately, every EIB infrastructure investment ought to contribute to people's resilience. So in other words, we see plenty of opportunities in our partner countries. The second thing I would like to say, it has to be everywhere. I mean, it's clear that the needs are substantial in these developed countries, in small island developing states, in Africa in particular, because of the high vulnerability and growing demand for infrastructure. And we will increase our activities to support clients in vulnerable countries. We see also the fact that, COVID has also increased the need for support because it has eroded the ability of low-income countries to cope with the negative consequences of climate change. And finally, I would say it has to be comprehensive. Adaptation finance has to go beyond the design of individual projects, and it has to adopt a system approach. And that is something that means for us understanding better the socioeconomic context of an infrastructure investment and ensure the delivery of environment and social benefits, investing in broader aspects of gender equity, of women's economic empowerment, and social development is also an important element of our increased ambitions around climate action. And we see that completely linked, and climate action and environment sustainability. We, as the Bank of the European Union, we have, and we see ourselves as an important role to help our clients adapt. And we will also seek to increase our financing and our advice for them so that their adaptation plan can be better fit. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ambroise. I think this theme around integration of infrastructure investments and integration of climate risks into all decision-making is a really important one. So maybe moving next to Jennifer, often when people think about infrastructure, the mental image they have is a seawall or a physical asset, but it's more than that. It's also green infrastructure. And you have really pioneered some really novel ways of thinking about green infrastructure investments and business models to enable green infrastructure investing. So could you talk a little bit about that and what you think are the critical elements of enabling successful investments in green infrastructure projects?
It's interesting to have an organization like the Nature Conservancy, an environmental organization, participating in a panel on infrastructure. And I think it represents the incredible opportunity in a post-COVID world to connect the dots between our different worlds that often don't talk to each other. So on this point of natural infrastructure and using nature's technology in infrastructure is something the Nature Conservancy has been working really hard to actually demonstrate the value of nature in infrastructure to really build back better. I mean, nature has perfected her technology for millions of years of evolution. And I think often engineers don't look at nature in the same way that we look at nature or look at traditional infrastructure. So I'm thrilled that this panel is really addressing this and seeing how we can incorporate the aspects of green infrastructure or mangroves into the infrastructure debate. So this is essential now more than ever as the world looks to rebuilding our economies that must be built to be resilient to not only the climate crisis, but also future pandemics. And this is really what I wanted to talk about today is kind of two main aspects that the Nature Conservancy, working through partnerships, has really been able to achieve in thinking about how do we build back better. So the two key elements I want to mention are the need to really create the business case for incorporating nature, to demonstrate the cost-effective role that green infrastructure can provide, and how blending the green with the gray can often yield to greater and more diverse benefits than thinking through just our traditional lens of engineering human-built gray infrastructure solutions. And the other space that we've seen real success is around financial innovation and finding partners who are willing to take a risk on new financial products that value the role that nature plays in developing our resilience to the climate crisis. I want to give you one quick example. In Quintana Roo in Mexico, we've worked with the insurance and tourism industries to create a new product that ensures the area's precious coral reef, which provides coastal protection from storms, reduces beach erosion, and has enormous tourism value. The insurance scheme pays out in the event of a hurricane to help repair any damages caused to the reef. And recently, unfortunately, when Hurricane Delta made landfall in Quintana Roo last October, it triggered a 40% payout of this policy, leading to $800,000 being made available to repairs for the reef. And this is the first time ever that a reef will benefit from a wide-scale response funded by an insurance policy payout. So the next challenge for us and the entire insurance and infrastructure community is how do we replicate that? How do we find those partners? How do we find those governments who are willing to take a risk on incorporating the value of nature and natural capital into infrastructure going forward?
Great, thanks, Jennifer. I think this theme of innovation and risk assessments and risk incorporation are really interesting ones. And I think a really interesting, good segue into, Martina, your work at S&P. One way to think about it is to say that climate resilient infrastructure de facto ought to be inherently less risky than an equivalent one that has not considered physical climate risks. So to what extent are you seeing these differential risks already priced into asset prices today? And what might businesses, governments need to do more differently to start to price these risks into decisions today?
I think when we begin to look at how the markets are capturing and pricing risk, some of this differs region to region. Just last year, for example, in the United States, we saw the CFTC publish a report that really was quite a landmark report in its recognition of the extent to which climate risk represents a systemic risk for the U.S. financial system and the U.S. overall from an economic standpoint. And we are very engaged in the dialogue around first beginning to understand where that risk sits specific to physical assets and infrastructure, and then also beginning to participate in a number of forums to actually get to the specific measurement and pricing aspects of it. And a couple of examples I would give. One is we did a report using some of the data that we provide out of our TrueCost business today and partnered with S&P Global Ratings. And we looked at the US municipal finance landscape and at the county and the asset level. And we found that about 38% of US counties are actually at risk of water scarcity, for example, in an extreme climate scenario by 2050. And so this is the kind of analysis that will first help all stakeholders, including investors, policymakers, companies, and municipalities, to really understand where that risk actually lies. And the part two to that, obviously, is how do you bring the measurement, the disclosure, and the frameworks around being able to actually assess that such that it can be priced with the work that's being done out of CCRI. And that work is quite important as it seeks to really understand at a fundamental level within the financial statements around infrastructure, such how do we actually assess the physical risk as well as the implication of climate resilient investment on the lifetime of assets, the valuation of assets, and the overall picture for an investor, for example, as they're making decisions around infrastructure. So these things we think are extremely important. There's a lot more work to do. I think from business and governments, having a focus on more disclosure, more consistent measurement and policy frameworks will be very important to advance this work as we go forward.
Great. Thanks, Martina. As you were speaking, it struck me that one way to think about this problem is there's the question of demand for capital, supply for capital, and how we enable the flow between the two. And a lot of what you're describing related to pricing risk, disclosures helps to drive that capital flow from supply to demand. But Ambrose, I think this brings me to a question for you as thinking about this $1 trillion of investment that you're looking to deploy. I mean, one of the barriers that is often described when it comes to climate resilient infrastructure is that demand for capital, right? It's as you think about a suitable project pipeline, the availability of projects. So would love to hear from you a little bit. As you think about EIB, what role do you see for EIB, other institutions of that kind, in strengthening the upstream project preparation and enabling that pipeline of projects related to climate resilient infrastructure?
I'll answer that immediately, but let me just say, because I agree very much with what Martina said, that we are convinced at EIB that the speed of the change and a big part of the change will come from the investors. And that when you look at the way young investors in particular are interested in having investment that makes sense, that that profit is not everything, etc. I think this is very promising. So at EIB, what we are going to do in particular for our countries in low-income countries in Africa, etc., is to provide additional approaches for our upstream engagement. And for example, when it comes to broader national or regional resilience planning on the public sector side, such as NDCs, national adaptation plans, or on the commercial side, supporting technology and innovation. And innovation was stressed also by Jennifer, that through startups or scaling up existing businesses. But to achieve this, what we are doing is we are working on various fronts, including financial products, advisory services, and policy support. And that's the combination that I think is important. And for example, we are working closely with other financial institutions in the Caribbean, in North Africa, to jointly expand adaptation finance in their regions. We also support CRAFT, an investment fund targeting private companies providing climate resilience solution. But I would like to stress in finishing one point, which is we will need to be all on board to have that successful. We'll need to have all the multilateral development banks, to all financial institutions. This is really a collective responsibility.
Yeah, it's interesting, the response to the earlier question, Ambrose, you used a word that struck with me, which was comprehensive, right? And I think this is a whole of system transformation, or a role is needed as we think to address this issue. Jennifer, from a green infrastructure standpoint, what are specific challenges, bottlenecks, opportunity areas that you see?
Yeah, thanks for that. And Ambrose, I completely agree with you. I think this idea of a whole systems approach is going to require a key element, which is what we're calling radical collaboration. It's really getting governments, banks, environmental organizations to think differently. Because I think to have that systems approach, we often go into these things on a very project by project. Let's just solve this issue right here, right now. And I think to really have comprehensive change dealing with the climate crisis, we have to really think in alternative ways, and that comes through radical collaboration. I mean, to the specific question around scale, we found that when governments get behind the idea of incorporating the value of nature and of natural capital into the built environment, we can scale much faster, even than these great, pilot projects that we've done around the world. So having the government policy to incentivize companies as well as local municipalities to incorporate nature, to actually bring a value to that nature, whether it's through carbon credits or insurance policies or other things that really actually recognize that value, that's going to help us scale a lot faster. And we're seeing some great examples in the US where the Army Corps of Engineers is starting to actually do this at scale with respect to ensuring that mangrove systems are protected, for example, as we see increased sea level rise and storm related issues. So the other key thing, I think, to help us pilot and innovate that will enable us to get to scale is really the availability of risk capital in a pre-feasibility and early stage environment, because a lot of what we're talking about here hasn't been tried at scale. So how do we test? How do we develop those solutions that will enable us to see whether they work or not, and then innovate and scale in a way that we need to address the problems of the climate crisis? So having availability of venture support, venture capital, whether it's philanthropic or longer term capital that will enable us to try and test and often fail and then start again and do and innovate related to that is really critical. And I think without those two things, government incentives as well as this pre-feasibility money, I think it's going to be hard for us to really scale in the way that we need to scale. And I think the third thing I'll mention is just around awareness. So often we don't even think about nature as a component of infrastructure. And so really encouraging engineers to talk to others that have different solutions and in raising that awareness about the feasibility of nature being incorporated into traditional gray infrastructure. That's another really key thing. And we need to do that together. We need to have environmentalists who are environmental engineers be embedded in these companies so they're talking the same language. So that's really key. And just as a wrap-up point, I think it's just really critical that as we think about the $90 trillion of the next 30 years that we need for infrastructure, that we ensure that everything we build, whether it's gray or green, doesn't harm biodiversity and nature, but in making sure that it really supports climate goals.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think you used the word innovation, and that's a word that a few of you have used in this conversation. And then we've also, of course, talked about the importance of pricing risk. But at its core, then, the nuts and bolts of it, it comes down to thinking about new tools, new financial instruments to enable this infrastructure deployment. So Martina, I want to bring you into that. What tools do you see are needed? What new financial instruments are needed as we think about deploying these forms of capital? Where do you see innovation happening today?
Certainly, I was part of the CFTC subcommittee that produced the climate report, and there was, plenty of dialogue around co-investment options, guarantees and things like that. So there are a variety of ways to incentivize this and bring the right amount of support from both public and private sector. I think one of the things around around this as well is just having the data and the analysis to be able to actually start some of the work before you even can get to what the financing plan or approach would look like. And we know that climate risk doesn't impact companies, geographies, municipalities, or even physical assets in the same way. And so there's a lot that needs to be done around just some of that foundational understanding of where the risk lies and actually mapping out what that could look like over a period of time. And you'll see many companies, including ourselves, who have focused on building out physical risk databases and hazard models and things of that nature. I would say that awareness is critical, and we did a survey of about 3,500 companies last year. And while we found that about 2/3 of them had policies that were indeed aligned to the SDGs, which I think is a helpful framework for making sure there's a balance there around nature and overall impact, only 1% actually had policies specifically aligned to SDGs 14 and 15, which are the ones that are focused on life below water, life on land. And so, raising that awareness and specifically around biodiversity and impact, I think is going to be enormously important. But, more broadly, there are probably three categories of approaches or tool sets, I would say one is just, the sort of quantitative data, whether it is geospatial frameworks, and physical risk data. Those are the types of data that will help not just with the analysis of current state and remediation, et cetera, but also the planning for future investments, so that you're not actually investing in infrastructure in high-risk areas, for example. A second area is just the policy and infrastructure, policy-related infrastructure in support of this, and some of that has also been discussed here today, and we see that coming through with the massive commitments around net zero, which needs to also play its way into all of the different areas in an economy, including infrastructure. And then I would say there's some perhaps not as obvious, but very important, just basic work that needs to happen around things like building codes and things of that nature, so that we can actually make sure that this is being accounted for and planned for in every in every way as we think about infrastructure investments and planning going forward. So those are some of the key things I would highlight.
That's great, Martina. I love the specificity of some of the things that you mentioned. So maybe we're close to on time at the end of the panel now. Maybe if I could just ask you all one final question in closing, and it's the same question to all of you. This can feel like a really big, overwhelming, daunting problem. Maybe if you could just have, the quick 30 seconds on what is one thing that gets you excited, inspired, optimistic about making progress on building the infrastructure we need. Maybe Ambroise, I can start with you.
What makes me optimistic is that the recognition of the magnitude of the problem is there, and that actions in 2020 have really been there also to cope with this big issue. The sooner we start, the better. And I think what makes me also optimistic is this kind of event where you see that people who are coming from very different worlds come to the same conclusion. That makes me optimistic.
Jennifer?
Well said, Ambroise. As I think about what we've done with vaccine response to COVID, that gets me optimistic. The ability for our societies to come together to actually solve the greatest challenges of our time in record time, I think is amazing. And if we can apply that same approach to the climate crisis and think about the role of nature in infrastructure, as we've been discussing, I know that we can have tremendous scalable success. It's just getting us all to focus on what is a very complex problem. But I know through human ingenuity, we can do it. So that gets me excited.
Yeah, I always joke that I think while the pandemic has been just this incredibly horrific time, I think what it's also done is made everyone aware of risks. So everyone is a risk practitioner and maybe also a central banker to some degree. But I think we now have a much deeper understanding of as a society on how to think about risks than we did prior to 2020. Martina, same question for you.
I would say it's the opportunity to harness a lot of the data that non-traditional data sets and actually bring them into scalable ways to measure and analyze. For me, that is certainly for the role that we as S&P Global play. That's the area that is of most excitement to us and where we spend a lot of our time.
Great, thank you all. This has been a really interesting discussion. I think if I was to take away maybe 3 words to try and synthesize what was a very rich conversation, it's integration. This needs to be a part of every decision we're making. It can't be its own separate thing. Innovation of various kinds, whether that's in the form of financial innovation, whether that's in the form of new models of collaboration, and then comprehensiveness as the third. This will require a whole of system effort. We need all stakeholders to play a role. So hopefully we've inspired folks and given people a sense of some of the tools and specific steps they need to take to start to think about building the infrastructure we need. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that was a riveting conversation. Thank you very much to Mekhala Krishnan and all the panelists for emphasizing the urgent need to increase the quantity and the quality of investment in infrastructure, and also for providing clear examples of what can be done to achieve a resilient infrastructure. Now, continuing on the same theme, in the next video, we will make room for young professionals. Let's hear what their take is on what this adaptive world should be.
I am keen to work on climate resilience infrastructure because it's a way to achieve the sustainability goals of the cities, therefore improving the quality of life of its citizens.
I am personally passionate about infrastructure because it has the power to reduce inequalities and provide access to opportunities and to create a healthier and safer built environment.
In as much as they contribute to building resilience to climate change, infrastructure networks are not spared the physical impacts of climate change. It will therefore be very useful to design and build infrastructure networks that would be able to account for the present and the future consequences of climate change.
Infrastructure, whether we live in cities or in rural areas, is the backbone of the modern world that we live in, and this infrastructure is highly vulnerable to climate-induced disaster.
Given that infrastructure plays a major role in mobilizing and empowering communities globally, it is absolutely essential to climate-proof it.
Ensuring that people, especially the most vulnerable ones, live in a safe and resilient housing to develop a positive social relationship and economic livelihoods while reducing risk of climate change and disasters are the utmost priority.
We have the ethical responsibility of ensuring that our societies and our communities are safe through the infrastructure we construct, especially the most vulnerable ones.
Key priorities are to build infrastructure that is not harmful to the environment, but most of all, infrastructure that helps in increasing the livelihoods of vulnerable communities all over the world.
Our first priority must be to tap on the potential of technology for data-driven decision-making.
The priority is to enhance the knowledge among key actors, to comprehend the importance of climate resilience infrastructure, to start mainstreaming climate resilience consideration into their agenda.
We need to embed climate resilience thinking into all decision-making processes regarding the construction, maintenance, operation, and deconstruction of infrastructure.
I would say more resources in terms of financial and human resources should be pumped into the designing and development of infrastructure. Also, the standard for developing infrastructure should be based on very adequate climate data.
Surely it takes integrated planning, good governance, and robust funding and financing mechanisms to deliver this. But we're all in the same boat. There is no plan B, so we all need to act now.
Isn't it great to witness the enthusiasm and the commitment of these young leaders from all corners of the globe who, of course, own the future of this one planet that we have and are rightfully thinking ahead. Now, this brings us to the final part of this segment. We will focus now on how we can achieve systemic change needed to ensure that people have access to reliable, efficient, and clean infrastructure services. But before I introduce you to the moderator of this session, let's hear from Cynthia Azare Bediako, who is the Chief Director of the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation in Ghana. She will address a pioneering study that is being undertaken to adopt a systems approach to Ghana's infrastructure.
We see a clear need to ensure that our infrastructure systems are resilient to the impacts of climate change. Across Africa, there is a need to increase the volume of investment in infrastructure. The African Development Bank estimates that Africa's infrastructure needs are between 130 to 170 billion US dollars per year, while the current financing is in the range of 68 to 108 billion per year, a clear financing gap. In Ghana, we are taking ambitious actions to provide the infrastructure that we need to achieve our development aims and secure progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a common theme through the development of our nationally determined contributions, National Adaptation Plan, and National Infrastructure Plan. All of these must be aligned to our efforts to address current infrastructure needs whilst promoting sustainable development for the Ghanaian people. That is why we are pleased to be pioneering an initiative to improve our understanding at a national level on how best to plan, invest, and manage climate-resilient infrastructure. It includes both traditional grey and green infrastructure. This initiative is being developed by a great set of partners, GCA, GNOPS, UNEP, and the University of Oxford. The project started in July 2020, with initial results already becoming available. Using new analytical tools and close collaboration across governments, this initiative is supporting the integration of resilience into infrastructure planning. It is enabling us to take a strategic evidence-based view to inform our infrastructure planning. We welcome the initial results of the project and how it will improve Ghana's infrastructure systems. The first phase of this work is already providing insights about the areas of most risk and promising areas for strengthening resilience. Beyond this, it is showing the impact of climate change on different groups, particularly highlighting the importance of gender issues for resilience infrastructure. This is only the first step. We hope and expect that the results of the initial analysis will produce a portfolio of evidence-based adaptation projects that will be attractive to investors. We look forward to collaborating with financing institutions, including Africa Development Bank and the Green Climate Fund, as we move into the implementation phase. Furthermore, this work is providing valuable insights as Ghana revises its nationally determined contributions and will inform other policy processes in the future. We see great value in adopting systems approach to resilient infrastructure and look forward to working with GCA to share the lessons that we are learning with other countries. Thank you.
And thank you, Chief Director Bediako, for that message and for your leadership in promoting adaptation action in Ghana. Allow me now to introduce to you the moderator of the final discussion, Abul Kalam Azad. Azad is a special envoy of the Prime Minister of Bangladesh to the Climate Vulnerable Forum. He is dialing in from Bangladesh, where he actively promotes the interests of climate vulnerable countries to adapt to climate change. And in the past, Azad has made a significant contribution to the achievement of SDGs in Bangladesh. Yes, Azad, it's all yours.
Thank you, Adit, for introducing me. Distinguished panelists, guests and colleagues, welcome to this session, which will have some very important discussion on scaling up infrastructure investment to ensure long-term programs towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Before I give it to the distinguished panelists, let me take this opportunity to reiterate that the resilient infrastructure is not just about managing risk, but providing the foundation for the sustainable development in a changing climate. We need to ensure that all infrastructure are ready for the impacts of climate change for not only long-term support, but also near-term to recover and build back better from crises like the ongoing pandemic. Evidence is clear that progress has been made till today. Taking the case of the achievements in Ghana, as we heard just now, and even Bangladesh going forward using nature for more resilient infrastructure, the launches of its national program to assess, design, and finance resilient infrastructure, as well as prepare public-private partnership and public-private partnership knowledge module to ensure resilient procurement including the nature-based solution. Yet current adaptation actions must step up due to the high impacts of climate change that we are facing today all around the world. However, going forward, we must together continue to explore further options to mobilize funding in this sector and have greater implementation, which is essential to the close gaps and foster effective collaboration. With that note, I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Nike O'Regan, Director for Implementation, Practices and Standards, UNOPS. I would like to take this opportunity to announce that the Climate Vulnerable Forum and V20 have launched a CBF and V20 joint multi-donor fund under the management of UNOPS, and we look forward to a fruitful engagement in the pathway towards resilient infrastructure. So, Nike, as the UN-led agency for infrastructure, could you please share with us what will you be doing to help make resilient infrastructure system the norm? Thank you. Nate, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings, everybody. Having the mandate within the UN to implement quality infrastructure, UNOPS is committed to advancing a better understanding of infrastructure's key role in sustainable development. And our joint research with the University of Oxford shows that infrastructure can influence 92% of all targets across the SDGs. Infrastructure is also fundamental to achieve commitments under the Paris Agreement. Infrastructure contributes over 85% of greenhouse gases, making it the most important sector for climate mitigation. It also accounts for over 80% of adaptation costs, making it the most important sector for climate adaptation. We need infrastructure that is resilient and can adapt and scale for changing contexts. We face an uncertain future, impacted by a changing climate and pandemics, yet our world's infrastructure is too often unequipped to deal with the crisis because we took too narrow a view in its purpose and design. And with infrastructure needs at an unprecedented scale and limited financing to respond, we cannot afford to get it wrong. But we do have a unique opportunity to get it right if we act now. UNOPS calls for a paradigm shift in infrastructure planning to unlock its transformative potential. We should not view infrastructure as individual buildings or networks, but as part of a system that together has great potential to deliver on our global needs. We need to evaluate infrastructure performance and impact and quantify the risks with this broader understanding. And we need to do that on the scale of assets, cities, and entire nations. To create resilient infrastructure, countries need planning that takes into account the relationship between infrastructure systems and the natural environment, including the important role of nature-based solutions in addressing climate changes, which we've heard earlier. And it cannot just be left to engineers, financiers, and politicians, but the decisions on infrastructure need to include broader expertise that accommodate all the relevant perspectives. And based on evidence, including the demand and the shocks that it will be subjected to in the future. And partnerships are going to be critical to bring together the knowledge and expertise needed. As the example we just heard of in Ghana, we're working with our partners to conduct a landmark study on the impact of climate change on Ghana's infrastructure development. Under the leadership of the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, and together with the Global Centre on Adaptation, the University of Oxford and UNEP. And this study will help enhance the resilience of the national infrastructure systems in Ghana by developing a roadmap of evidence-based projects and policies in the energy, water and transport sectors. And it will provide important evidence to inform the revision of Ghana's national determined contributions and is going to provide key actions to support the empowerment of women and girls. And importantly, the roadmap will also guide external investment to enhance Ghana's resilience. And we thank the GCF and AFDB for their valuable contributions to the project so far and look forward to continuing this work as we progress onto the investment and implementation phase of the project. With our partners, we're supporting similar approaches in other countries, but evidence-based approaches need to be taken to scale and target climate action at the scale it requires. To close, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Government of Netherlands, Macquarie, and the Global Centre on Adaptation for their leadership in advocating the importance of infrastructure for a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for showing how UNEP is contributing to achieve these sustainable development goals by ensuring resilient infrastructure system. You have very rightly pointed out that the world is unequipped for combating this climate in terms of the infrastructure. Partnership, knowledge, and resources, this must be taken together. An evidence-based approach, as we heard from Ghana also. Thank you very much. Now I would request Mr. Yannick Glamarek, he's the Executive Director, Green Climate Fund, for sharing his remarks. Yannick, as the large climate fund, how is GCF going to support countries' efforts to achieve resilient infrastructure system? Over to Yannick.
Thank you very much, Assad. On behalf of the Green Climate Fund, it's a pleasure to be joining this discussion of the Climate Adaptation Summit. The mandate of the Green Climate Fund is to foster a paradigm shift toward low-emission climate resilient development in developing countries. To achieve this mandate, we invest across four main transitions: the energy transition, the built environment transition, including climate resilient infrastructure, the natural environment transition, and human security, well-being, and livelihood transition. In the field of built environment transition, we have invested $640 million to date in climate resilient agriculture and co-financed several times, leveraged several times this amount in co-financing from the public and private sectors. To achieve transformative change, we have adopted a four-pronged approach for climate resilient infrastructures. First, we promote integrated planning and policy development in order to maximize the synergies between climate mitigation, climate adaptation, sustainable development. We believe that integrated policy development and integrated planning could reduce the total amount of financing needed for climate resilient infrastructure by up to 40%. So that's our first prong. Our second prong is that we try to foster innovation, technological, but also financing, institutional innovation. Third prong is that we try to catalyze finance to scale up successful innovation. And the fourth and last prong is to try to create and share knowledge on best practices to align finance with these new investment opportunities. I will maybe try to give a couple of examples when it comes to climate resilient infrastructures. First, in terms of innovation, we support in a number of countries integrated low carbon building codes that are also resilient to multiple disasters. And whenever possible, we try to work with our partners in identifying green infrastructure alternative to gray infrastructure alternative, or couple both, in order to maximize the development and the biodiversity co-benefits. Another example when it comes to innovation, we are right now working on a number of fairly exciting innovation. One of them, for example, is to try to come up with a new asset valuation for climate resilient infrastructure. And this will enable the investors to basically balance the higher upfront cost of a climate resilient innovation infrastructure and the higher technological risk with the lower operational and maintenance cost and lower climate physical and transition risk. And developing a very rigorous asset valuation methodology could enable us to float resilience bonds and basically create a new class of assets for investors. Coming to catalyzing finance, one of our key commitments is to make sure that public finance work for the most vulnerable. Several speakers have mentioned the importance of public-private financing. What we have to make sure is that it works for LDCs, it works for the seeds, and right now it's not always the case. And so we are trying to push a different front line, and notably during our last board, we approved a $750 million project for subnational climate equity investment with Pegasus advisors to co-finance the subnational middle-scale adaptation and mitigation initiative. Half of the 42 countries that are part of this program are LDCs and seeds, almost half. And that's, for us, it's a type of mobilizing at scale that we would like to support. And an example about knowledge, we are part of a number of different coalitions, such as, for example, the coalition for climate resilient infrastructure, with whom we work on this new asset valuation methodologies, or the coalitions for disaster resilient infrastructure, or fast infra. And with this different coalition, we are trying to compare notes to support each other and develop, codify knowledge and develop a new set of methodologies and labels that could here again foster investment towards this new type of assets. So we are very excited about the momentum that we are seeing in that direction, and we are ready to step up our efforts to help developing countries scale up and realize their climate adaptation ambitions.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Very informative. Your delivery.
Something that I forgot to mention about Ghana, with whom we work. At first, I would like to very much thank the acknowledgement about Ghana, but I would like to praise Ghana because here you're speaking about a country that is basically proving a thought leader on all these dimensions.
Thank you. Thank you again for your additional information. So your the deliberation, especially on the integrated planning, innovation, new asset valuation, and knowledge coalition. Excellent. Thank you very much, Yannick, for your nice deliberation. Dear audience, we will be hearing now Solomon Quaynor. Solomon Quaynor, we maybe will not be able to see his live picture, unfortunately for the low internet connectivity, but we will hear him. So, Mr. Solomon Quaynor, would you please share your thoughts that as Africa's Development Bank, as the Vice President, your power, energy, climate, and green growth. So as Vice President for private sector infrastructure and industrialization, what is your vision for driving enhanced climate resilience across the continent? Mr. Solomon.
Thank you very much, Assad. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Please.
Okay, great. So, Assad, in the context of Africa, I think we can agree that Africa's infrastructure is very vulnerable to climate change, notwithstanding the fact that Africa disproportionately contributes less to the climate issues. And hence, this call to action at the summit for building resilient infrastructure is only timely. In terms of the African Development Bank's vision, I think I can present it contextually if we focus on cities, which are very, if we focus on cities, especially coastal cities that are very, at risk in terms of, not building resilient resilient infrastructure. So Africa has the most rapidly growing urban population in the world. Urbanization is at a very high level, and an estimated $25 billion per year needs to be invested in basic urban infrastructure, and additionally, $20 billion per year in housing to respond to the urban migration that we're seeing across Africa. The potential consequences of climate change, such as the rise in sea levels and erratic weather patterns, are expected to increasingly strain the capacities of Africa's urban systems and heighten their vulnerability. And a good example is in 2019, the hurricanes and cyclones, Idai and Kenneth, that wreaked havoc in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, led to significant loss of lives, but also destroyed infrastructure estimated in value at $2 billion. These investments need to be rebuilt, climate-proofed from the onset to make sure that it's sustainable because Africa cannot really afford the replacement costs, and insurance is not necessarily a panacea to resolve matters going forward. So as the African Development Bank, we are committed to helping African countries transition towards low carbon and climate resilient development pathways. We're looking at this across several sectors, transport, waste and pollution management, energy, water, and other services, related to urban infrastructure. To give you a sense of the quantum, the African Development Bank's annual investment volumes, financing volumes, is about $10 billion. And our financing for climate resiliency has increased fourfold from 9% of our total annual investments in 2016 to about 36% in 2019. By the end of 2021, we expect to reach a target of 40%. In addition, our financing between mitigation and adaptation, the bank has expanded the percentage of its annual financing to adaptation from 26% in 2016 also to 55% in 2019. Overall, the AFDB has pledged to double current levels of climate finance from $12.5 billion that was realized in aggregates during the period 2016 to 2020, to double it to $25 billion over the next 5 years to support low carbon and climate resilient development as well. So very importantly, what we're doing also differently as an institution is that we're ensuring that all projects go through rigorous preparation and are based on climate-informed designs, amongst other considerations. Typically, this work would tend to be done by the environmental, social, and governance units in a lot of development finance institutions, but we've actually elevated this to the highest level operationally. We've created, a department of climate change headed by Tony Young, and this group is empowered to actually review all projects that the institution looks at in various forms of categorization for their vulnerabilities, especially at the design stage, towards climate challenges. In addition, we've set up the Resilient Cities Program, where the AFDB has launched the Urban and Municipal Development Finance to enhance urban upstream planning to promote urban sustainability, environment and climate resilience, and good governance and fiscal management. This approach is being piloted in several cities across Africa, including Antananarivo in Madagascar, Bizerte in Tunisia, Conakry in Guinea, Dodoma in Tanzania, and Libreville in Gabon. Building resilient and quality infrastructure is not a nice to have, but rather a must have. We can no longer model our designs on historical worst case situations that were supposed to happen very infrequently, as climate change is changing their frequency and severity. African governments cannot afford replacement costs. Insurance premiums are going to skyrocket. So it's best to build resilient infrastructure from the onset. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salman, for your very elaborate information how Africa is coping up with the climate resilience, and also how African Development Bank is putting its investment for future resilient infrastructure. So thank you very much, distinguished panelists, Mr. Salman, Yannick, and Mr. Naik. You have shared very insightful thoughts, and special thanks to you and your leadership in addressing the existing challenges along the lines of climate change, compounded by other contextual realities like the pandemic. From this session, it is clear that we need to increase the uh, investment in infrastructure. The outcome of this discussion today, take away home, is maybe adaptation plan should be aligned with the natural development plan, keeping the traditional norms and values in mind. We should be planning the evidence-based approach, and integrated planning and policy should be at the top ranking priority. Also, investment is to be increased in infrastructure. It is not choice, but it is a must. Uh, with that, I will once again thank the speakers for their contribution and sharing their values, insightful thinkings. I will give now back to Adit with a note of appreciation to all of you for staying with us in this session. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Azad and Mrs. O'Regan, Glamarek and Quaynor for this very crucial conversation, which gave us a clear roadmap for how we can transform our approach to infrastructure resilience. Thank you so very much, gentlemen, and apologies for the connectivity issues that we were experiencing. I hope that you had a clear idea of what Mr. Quaynor specifically was saying, because we could not see him on the screen. There's a little time left, so I have a chance to dive into the chat session with you. Just 2 questions that we picked out, and I will be reading them out and also giving you the answers that were answered by the experts behind the scene. So question 1 is by Janina Romero. Thank you for it. How could you build infrastructure for transport sustainability is the question, and the answer from our experts is one example is in Mozambique, where the World Bank has helped the country build back better from the impacts of Cyclone Idai. The road systems were built with better quality and resilient design measures to ensure that it would resist to extreme events. And the second and last question I can take from the chat is by Agnes Almario. Thank you very much, Agnes. The question is, what best practices for infrastructure can the Philippines adapt and to mitigate climate change? And the answer is the Philippines National Climate Change Plan 2011 to 2018 provides strong direction for adaptation planning, including water sufficiency, sustainable energy, and climate smart service. The ultimate goal is to build the adaptive capacities of women and communities to increase the resilience of vulnerable sectors and natural ecosystems. I hope both of you are satisfied with the answers that you were giving. And please continue asking your questions in the chat room. They will be answered at some point. So up next, a message from Patrick Verkooyen, who is the CEO of the Global Center of Adaptation, He will focus on the importance of catalyzing resilient infrastructure systems and will be telling us why this is a top priority for GCA.
The unprecedented fiscal stimulus deployed for COVID for recovery presents us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to support long-term growth through infrastructure. Infrastructure is and should be a key component to build forward better during and after COVID pandemic. It provides jobs and underpins economic growth. But the question is, how can we ensure that infrastructure investments deliver the maximum benefit in strengthening resilience? A key part of the solution is to think and act with system approaches. We need to understand infrastructure as many interconnected systems rather than individual projects. we need to ensure that resilience is included from the beginning, upstream, into the planning process already. Adopting an infrastructure systems approach enables us to develop and implement infrastructure that is cheaper in the long run, more flexible and more robust than would be possible if just looking on a project-by-project basis. It ultimately allows for the development of a pipeline of investable projects to address key infrastructure needs. Realizing the potential of a systems approach requires political vision, cutting-edge analytical tools, and the creation of partnerships with financing institutions. Catalyzing these partnerships to accelerate adaptation is precisely what the GCA is committed to do. We are pleased to release today our joint publication with the Asian Development Bank, a system-wide approach for infrastructure resilience, which sets out an ambitious roadmap for achieving the needed transformational change. In Ghana, we have been collaborating with an excellent set of partners, led by the government, in collaboration with UNOPS, UNEP, and the University of Oxford. We're also collaborating with key financing institutions, particularly the African Development Bank and the Green Climate Fund, to ensure that the results of this initiative in Ghana do not sit on the shelf, but instead lead to increased financing flows. We are delighted to be expanding this approach to South Asia. We are working with the government of Bangladesh under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister to develop the first initiative in this region. And these two countries are just the beginning. We're working to develop a cohort of 20 countries or even more, building on the pioneering work in Ghana and Bangladesh. We have an opportunity to rethink the way we plan, design, develop, and manage our infrastructure. We must seize it to ensure we are better prepared to protect everyone when the next emergency arises.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and congratulations on expanding the GCA work to Bangladesh and far beyond. Moving on now to the finale of this infrastructure anchoring event, I would like to round up with Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, the Minister of Infrastructure and Water Management, and with Willem Stitzelaar, who is the Senior Managing Director of Macquarie Capital, and he is here on behalf of Shamara Wickramanayake. Your Excellency, let me start with you. What would you say after, being here this morning? What would you say is what you will be taking away from this event?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all the speakers we heard for their inspiring and wise words. I cannot summarize all the good things they have said, but maybe just a few short remarks. I think it's all about technical and financial cooperation. That was one thing that was mentioned very often. And then you have to include the whole life cycle, so do not forget maintenance, very important. I thought it was also very inspiring to hear about all the financial instruments like the guarantee funds, etc. It's all about de-risking. And I think the focus on technology was very well mentioned. And what Shamara said, we have to make sure that best practices turn into standard practices. I thought that was a very good remark as well. And also that we do not we have to look at the bigger picture. What was said about nature, about biodiversity, we should really take that into account. And if I can ask people to join another session, we have also an action track on nature-based solutions. So please tune in on that one as well. It's about the integrated risk management. And looking back at the opening session with Kristalina Georgieva from the IMF, where she actually said that from now on it will be a part of the country assessments of the IMF to make sure that the risk regarding climate adaptation is taken into account. I think that is also a major change. So thanks again to all of the speakers for their inspiring words.
And thank you for rounding this up so nicely for us. Thank you so much. Willem Stitzelaar, I would like to ask you the same question. What will you be taking away from this event?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. There's been so many highlights today. Well, first of all, we're very proud to support the work of the GCA and to co-host this event, of course. And as the world's largest infrastructure investor, we really understand that need for investment in resilient infrastructure. So we've been really inspired by today and all of the successes of action underway, but also seen that those successes are pretty much dwarfed by the challenge that we've yet to come to. And we try to keep it simple at Macquarie. We basically think that adaptation for us is equal to responsible stewardship and a good business sense. But we also work in partnership with parties to finance new infrastructure designed to meet those climate adaptation needs. Now, I just want to call out one example here, particularly in the Netherlands, where we've been working with a company called Tucardo to help advance and redesign the Oostschelde tidal power plant. This is a really interesting example for today, because this project consists of turbines in one of the sluice gates of the Oostschelde storm surge barrier, with the potential of scaling up. But it really serves as an international showcase for the tidal energy sector and the climate adaptation solutions, whilst, and this is important, integrating nature in the design, basically give the freedom to the water where you can. But our collective goal must be to create many, many more projects like this. And we need to prove project structures beyond just upgrading existing assets to be more resilient. We need action. So worldwide, there are 451 deltas identified that have risk of flooding. And I'll summarize, but they're all suitable for installing flood barriers, for example, combined with tidal energy. And by creating that pipeline of projects, and we're talking about a new asset class earlier on, we can put the full force of the private sector to work on climate adaptation. So replicating that incredible success of private finance in climate mitigation projects that we've already seen when we're talking about renewable energy. So today has really helped move us forward on that. And it will take sustained effort. So we look forward to working with everyone on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Willem Stitselaar, and thank you both for telling us the way forward, I suppose we could say, and also for your closing remarks and for encouraging stakeholders to continue on this path of collaboration, because lots has been done, but there's still a lot more to do. Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen and Willem Stitselaar, thank you both so very much. I will be rounding up now by thanking the Dutch government, the Macquarie Group, and the Global Centre on Adaptation for organizing this event. And this event showcased what resilient infrastructure is, what we have now, what we need, and how we get it. And it also showed us how we can accelerate action, the role that you and I can play in building this resilient infrastructure for the future. Thank you all for participating in this event, and please make sure to watch the CAS talk on Channel 1, which will follow this, during which we will elaborate even more on the role of companies in achieving resilient infrastructure. And after that, it will be time for the closing ceremony of this Climate Adaptation Summit, and that will start at 12 o'clock Central European Time, live from the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. Really, you can't miss that. To me, it's been a great privilege to be a part of this summit. I greatly look forward to the actual results of all that we have been discussing today. Thank you. Goodbye.